The sound of the cabin door sealing shut was like a cold, surgical strike, cutting off every escape. Inside the narrow, airless space of Meridian, Airways Flight 788, from New York to Los Angeles, no one could have guessed that a minor confrontation was about to ignite a global storm. Victor Langford, 40-8, CEO of Langford Capital, boarded the plane as though the entire world ought to step aside. Every stride carried the rhythm of authority. Italian leather shoes striking fast against the aisle floor, the scent of expensive cologne mingling with the impatient breath of a man chasing a 9-figure deal. In his ear, a Bluetooth headset blinked blue, a tiny, arrogant pulse of technological power. "No, I don't negotiate," he snapped into the line. "Tanaka signs, or he loses the deal. There's only one rule in this game: mine." In seat 12C, Marcus Reed, 40-1, quietly lowered his book and looked up at the storm approaching in human form. He wore a pale blue shirt, soft khaki pants, and the calm presence of someone used to sitting through turbulence without ever losing his breath. To everyone else, he was just another anonymous traveler. But in his eyes was the stillness of a man who had faced the sky thousands of times. When Victor reached row 12, his gaze landed on a simple fabric suitcase neatly stored in the overhead bin. It occupied exactly half the space. The other half, he assumed, was his by natural right. He tilted his chin and shoved his oversized cognac leather briefcase toward the compartment. It didn't fit. He pushed harder. The plastic groaned under the strain. Marcus looked up, his voice calm but firm. "If you turn it sideways, it might fit better, sir." Victor snapped his head around. In those cold steel eyes, Marcus wasn't a man offering help. He was an intruder trespassing on territory. The anger didn't explode. It hissed through clenched teeth, small but sharp. "I know how to handle my things. Don't point." He shoved again, harder this time. The impact cracked the plastic lining, and Marcus's suitcase jammed sideways with a dry, jarring sound. Marcus stood, half a head taller, but his tone remained even. "No need to damage my bag. We all paid for our seats just the same." One sentence, and the entire cabin went silent. Flight attendant Olivia Park looked up, ready to intervene. But Victor smirked, a cold laugh slipping out like a blade. "You think you're on my level?" Eyes turned. The invisible current of discomfort, fear, and quiet judgment rippled through every row. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply stepped back slightly, his gaze steady, as if seeing straight through the man's fury. Outside the window, the morning sky was a washed-out gray. No one knew that only a few hours later, the man being humiliated now would become the only reason this plane would ever leave the ground. A soft click broke the stillness. Tessa Nguyen, a journalist in row 15, had just hit record. The storm had found its first witness, and it had begun. The air inside the cabin thickened, heavy as if even oxygen hesitated to move. The hum of the engines outside felt distant, while every sound within seemed swallowed whole, leaving only the sharp rhythm of Victor Langford's breath and the dense silence surrounding Marcus Reed. Olivia Park, the lead flight attendant, approached quickly, her professional smile polished by thousands of flights. "Sir, please stay calm. We'll help you arrange." But Victor cut her off, his voice booming through the narrow cabin, sharp with anger and self-importance. "No, I'm not going to sit here while someone takes my space. That bag doesn't belong up there. Tell him to move it or check it. I have more important things to deal with." His words ricocheted off the walls, harsh and echoing. Passengers nearby froze. A young boy, maybe 8, tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, what's happening?" But she just shook her head and pulled him close. Marcus remained still, not angry, not afraid. His eyes simply pierced through the polished armor of the man before him. "There's no need for disrespect, sir," he said, each word clear but calm enough to avoid provocation. "We're all just trying to get where we need to go." The sentence fell like a drop of water on burning metal. A murmur rippled through the cabin. A few passengers exchanged glances, some nodding subtly in agreement, but none dared to speak. They feared trouble, or worse, ending up in a viral clip. Victor's face flushed crimson. He was a man accustomed to obedience, to bowed heads and quiet compliance. But here, in this cramped cabin, he stood before an ordinary man, one who refused to bow. "Do you know who I am?" Victor almost roared. "I paid for this seat. I pay the salaries of people like you." The words "people like you" slid from his mouth, cold and heavy. The entire cabin froze. Olivia noticed several phones subtly being raised, recording. Marcus didn't answer. He exhaled softly, then crouched slightly to adjust the strap of his bag, a small, composed gesture that only deepened Victor's humiliation. The man shoved harder, his voice trembling with fury. "I said, get off this plane if you won't listen." Olivia stepped in, raising a hand. "Mr. Langford, please control yourself. Every passenger has the right to use the overhead compartment." But Victor wasn't listening anymore. In his mind, the echo of unfinished negotiations, unsigned contracts, and the imagined pity of subordinates all blurred into blind rage. He jabbed a finger toward Marcus, shouting each word like a blade. "Get off this plane. If you don't, I'll have this airline remove you myself." The shout detonated through the cabin, shattering what little calm was left. In row 15, Tessan Nguyen didn't miss a second. She tilted her phone, zoomed in slightly. The red recording light blinked. In the frame, one man in a designer suit, dripping arrogance. One man in a simple shirt, calm and grounded. And between them, the fragile boundary between power and dignity. Olivia whispered into her interphone, calling for support. An elderly passenger shook his head and murmured, "Strange world. The one who deserves to be thrown out isn't the one he thinks." In row 12, Marcus slowly sat back down, opened his book, and said evenly, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just flying home." And Victor, still standing in the aisle, his hand trembling, whether from rage or shame, no one could tell. What none of them knew was that in just a few hours it would be Victor himself who would be forced to leave that plane, in the most unforgiving sense of the word. A soft ding echoed through the cabin, cold and indifferent, like a reminder that human power meant nothing against the steel machinery of the skies. The cabin shuddered slightly. Flight attendant Olivia looked up, receiving a signal from the cockpit. The captain's voice came through the speakers, deep, professional, but carrying a faint hesitation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've detected a technical alert. It's just a standard protocol check, but it will take a few minutes before we can depart." Passengers sighed collectively. Some unbuckled their seatbelts, others pulled out their phones to scroll. Victor Langford slumped into his seat, eyes rolling. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "A billion-dollar airline can't even start a plane. Ridiculous." Marcus Reed, still calm and silent, only glanced at his watch. He caught something in the captain's tone, a hint of fatigue that didn't belong before takeoff. An old instinct stirred in him, but he stayed quiet. No one needed to know he had once sat in that very cockpit, flown this exact model, for over a decade. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The air in the cabin thickened, the heat creeping in along with restlessness. Victor tapped his fingers impatiently on the tray table, each click sharper than the last. "Another day ruined by amateurs," he said loudly, making sure those nearby could hear. "If they knew how much money I'm losing because of this delay," Olivia approached, her polite smile barely holding. "Sir, please remain calm. The maintenance team is conducting a check." Victor turned, scoffing. "Do you think I paid to sit here breathing in hot plastic fumes?" At that moment, the intercom crackled again. But this time, it wasn't the calm voice of the captain. It was the gate agent's. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Captain Stein has shown signs of severe fatigue and is now being attended to by medical personnel. For safety reasons, this flight will return to the gate while we await new crew instructions." A wave of murmurs spread through the cabin. Sighs, anxious whispers. Victor's head snapped up, his mouth opening, then closing again. "He's sick? Then who's flying?" No one answered. The plane slowly taxied back toward the gate. Through the window, the runway lights shimmered across Victor's face, carving impatience into every line. When the jet bridge locked back into place, a woman in a Navy uniform stepped on board. Her name tag read Monica Patel, Operations Supervisor. She held a clipboard, her expression tense. "Ladies and gentlemen," Monica began, steadying her voice under hundreds of watchful eyes. "Because the captain has suddenly been deemed unfit to operate this aircraft, we are attempting to locate a reserve pilot certified for the A3221 model." She paused, exhaling softly. "However, at the moment, there are no available captains within range of JFK. If a replacement cannot be found, the flight may be delayed at least 6 hours, or worse, cancelled." The uproar came instantly. Complaints, groans, angry shouts. A businessman slammed his laptop shut. A young mother sighed. "God, my son has a hospital appointment tomorrow morning." Victor let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "No way. 6 hours. I'll lose the deal. What kind of circus are they running?" He shot to his feet, turning on Monica. "Get your manager here. I want to speak to someone with real authority." The supervisor kept her composure. "We are reviewing a temporary solution, Mr. Langford." Victor chuckled, hand on his hip. "A temporary solution? What are you going to do? Pull a pilot out of the passenger list?" The sarcasm drew a few uneasy laughs from the crowd. No one realized that just a few rows ahead, there was indeed someone who fit that description, and he had just looked up, a faint smile touching his lips. Marcus Reed gently closed his book and placed it on the tray. In his chest, that long, dormant feeling stirred again, the unmistakable pull of responsibility. He drew in a deep breath. The real storm hadn't even started yet. The front cabin door opened with a hiss as Monica Patel stepped in, accompanied by 2 technicians. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes carried something taut and fragile, tension laced with hope. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we're reviewing the passenger manifest. There's a possibility that one of our passengers today is a licensed pilot qualified to operate this aircraft. We're verifying now." The cabin went completely silent. A few passengers glanced around. Others let out small, disbelieving laughs. Victor Langford shot Olivia a mocking look. "A pilot among the passengers? Are you kidding me? What is this, a Hollywood movie?" Monica ran her finger down the printed list, her voice clear and carrying through the cabin. "We are looking for passenger Marcus Reed. Is there a Marcus Reed on this flight?" The words dropped like water into a sealed room. Every head turned. In seat 12C, the man in the light blue shirt slowly closed his book and looked up. He inhaled softly, then stood, his voice calm and firm. "I'm Marcus Reed." The air froze. Olivia blinked, recognizing him as the very man who had been shouted at less than half an hour earlier. Monica approached, her tone urgent but polite. "Mr. Reed, may I see your credentials? Our system indicates you're employed with Meridian Airways." Marcus nodded, reaching into his pocket for his wallet. Inside, beside a worn company ID, was a Federal Aviation Administration license marked Airline Transport Pilot and an A321 type rating certificate. He handed them over without pride or performance, only the quiet composure of someone accustomed to carrying the weight of human lives. Monica examined the documents, checking them against the electronic registry. Her hands trembled slightly. Then the radio on her shoulder crackled. "Dispatch to Patel confirmed. Captain Marcus Reed, active status, A3221 rated, checked 3 weeks ago. He's cleared." A wave of astonishment rippled through the cabin. Gasps, soft applause. Olivia's mouth fell open. Victor sat motionless, eyes wide, staring at the man before him. The same man he had dismissed as not worth a seat. Monica lifted her head, the tension in her expression breaking into relief. "Thank God," she murmured, then spoke louder for everyone to hear. "Captain Reed, if you're willing, please proceed to the cockpit. The entire crew and all passengers will be under your command." Marcus gave a small nod. He said nothing. He simply reached up, opened the overhead bin, and pulled down his simple canvas suitcase. Passengers shifted aside instinctively to give him room. From the bag, he withdrew a neatly folded black pilot's uniform, the 4 gold stripes on its shoulders gleaming under the cabin lights. The mark of the highest commercial rank. He slipped it on with smooth precision, no hesitation, no need for showmanship. Within minutes, the anonymous man from seat 12C had become Captain Marcus Reed, the embodiment of order, competence, and calm authority. Applause filled the cabin, but he only bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. His eyes held no pride, only the deep focus of someone preparing to carry 80 lives through the sky. As he walked past Victor, their eyes met. No words were spoken. None were needed. Marcus's gaze wasn't angry. It was as cold and clear as cockpit glass, professional, steady, untouched by ego. That silence, more than anything, made Victor feel small for the first time in his life. Marcus Reed, the man he had humiliated, was now the only person who could lift him off the ground. Straightening his collar, gripping his case, Marcus walked toward the cockpit door. Each step landed like a quiet, deliberate hammer, striking against the hollow shell of Victor Langford's pride. The cabin was silent. Only the faint click of seatbelts and the metallic sound of a zipper could be heard as Marcus Reed opened his suitcase. The cabin lights glimmered off his shirt fabric, then caught the golden threads on his shoulders. 4 gleaming bars of command. No one spoke, but every pair of eyes followed him. A few passengers pretended to scroll through their phones, but none looked away from the man whose presence was changing before their eyes. He removed his light travel shirt, folded it neatly, and slipped on a crisp black pilot's uniform, thick, structured fabric, the symbol of discipline and authority. By the time he fastened the last button, the ordinary traveler was gone. In his place stood someone who had flown through storms, who had faced decisions where a single mistake could cost hundreds of lives. He took out his cap, and when he placed it on his head, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Olivia Park, who had witnessed the earlier argument, raised a hand to her lips. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The quiet passenger she had tried to protect from humiliation was, in fact, her highest superior. Marcus turned to her and gave a small nod. "Prepare the cabin. I'll be in the cockpit in 1 minute." His voice, low and steady, carried a command that sent a shiver through her. It was no longer the voice of a man who had been insulted. It was the voice of a leader. In row 6, a young man stood and began to clap. Then another joined in. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted in applause, waves of it crashing down the aisle. "This man just saved our flight," someone shouted. Marcus smiled faintly, offering a small nod in return, then pulled his suitcase and began walking down the narrow aisle. The rhythmic roll of its wheels echoed like nails being driven into the coffin of Victor Langford's arrogance. Victor sat frozen in seat 2A. Gone was the man who commanded billion-dollar deals and silenced boardrooms. His eyes followed Marcus, dazed, as if trapped in a nightmare. He replayed every cruel word he'd spoken. "People like you, get off this plane." Each one returning like a blade twisting inward. Marcus stopped beside his seat. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, time stood still. There was no anger in Marcus's gaze, only the calm, cutting certainty of a man who knew exactly where he stood. He spoke softly, just loud enough for Victor to hear. "Now sit back. I'll take it from here." Then he moved on. A few passengers rose, clearing the path. The applause rose again, louder this time, rolling through the cabin until Marcus reached the cockpit door. He turned and nodded at Olivia. "We'll be in Los Angeles, on schedule." She nodded quickly, eyes shining with admiration and awe. The cockpit door closed behind him with a sharp, metallic click. But to Victor, it sounded like the door of judgment sealing shut. As the lock turned, the roles had reversed. The humiliated passenger was now the man commanding the fate of 180 souls. Victor Langford bowed his head. For the first time in years, he felt truly small, and at the front of the aircraft, Captain Marcus Reed took his seat, placed his hands on the controls, where power came not from money, but from skill, discipline, and respect. Inside the cockpit, the pale blue glow of the instrument panel reflected across the face of First Officer Daniel Ortiz, 36. Sweat glistened along his temple. In front of him, hundreds of switches and warning lights blinked like a chaotic maze. Moments earlier, he had watched his longtime colleague, Captain Harold Stein, carried out on a stretcher after a sudden chest pain. Now he was about to fly beside a man who, just minutes ago, had been a passenger. The cockpit door sealed shut behind Marcus Reed, cutting off the noise of the cabin. The air inside felt thick, almost suspended. Daniel turned, his eyes a mix of caution and disbelief. "You're really?" Marcus nodded slightly, set his suitcase down, and pulled out 2 folders, an airline transport pilot license and a current proficiency check certificate. He didn't try to impress, only spoke clearly and firmly. "Captain Reed, over 12,000 flight hours, most of them on the A321. You can verify with Denver Center. They've already confirmed." Daniel scanned the documents, his expression slowly easing. That calm, unpretentious voice was exactly what he'd been missing for the past 2 hours. Stability. He nodded. "All right, Captain. The aircraft's partially powered down. Stein reported an engine 2 pressure sensor fault. Maintenance said it was probably a false signal, but he felt a vibration when throttling up." Marcus sat in the left seat, the captain's seat, and touched the control panel with the familiarity of ritual. Every switch, every dial was exactly where memory told him it would be. His fingers moved across the trim and displays. "We don't deal in probably. Start from the top, full start checklist. APU off, reset electrical bus, recheck hydraulic pressure." Daniel blinked, surprised by the authority in that tone. Not commanding for dominance, but out of instinct. He began reading the checklist line by line. Fuel pumps on. Hydraulic pressure nominal. Engine 2 bleed air reset. "Good," Marcus replied briefly. Their coordination settled into rhythm, seamless, as if they had flown together for years. The cramped space, filled only with the sound of toggles clicking, the low hum of fans, and their synchronized voices, a technical symphony of precision. Marcus leaned forward, studying the diagnostics. The glow of the instruments lit his eyes. He noticed a subtle fuel trim imbalance, a detail so small most pilots would have missed it. "Trim right side down 0.2, he said. "It's skewing the pressure reading in the intake line. Try it again." Daniel adjusted. The screen flickered, then the yellow warning light snapped off. Silence for a heartbeat. Then Daniel looked up and smiled. "Lights out. Systems stable." Marcus leaned back. Sometimes all it takes is looking a little closer. The plane wasn't broken. It was just waiting to be understood. The words carried more than technical weight. They echoed like a parable, resonating beyond the cockpit, toward the cabin, where one man had misjudged another. Daniel drew a deep breath, picked up the intercom. "Ground control, this is Meridian 788. We have replacement captain on board. Captain Reed, A321 type rated. System checks complete. Requesting clearance for engine start." The radio crackled back. "Confirmed 788. Welcome back, Captain Reed." Marcus smiled faintly, placed his hand on the throttle, his voice low and steady as steel. "All right, Daniel. Start the engines. Let's take them home. The twin CFM engines roared to life, their deep hum rolling through the fuselage like the heartbeat of a giant coming awake. The cockpit dimmed to a calm glow, every gauge returning to green. Out in the cabin, Victor Langford looked up as the engines came alive. He didn't know that the sound, the same one he once called annoying noise, was now the sound of fate delivering him his most expensive lesson. Marcus glanced toward the sealed cockpit door, his eyes calm but infinite in depth. He had nothing left to prove. All he needed to do was fly. Meridian 788, cleared for takeoff. Runway 2. 2 right. The voice of air traffic control came through the headset, and with a single steady nod, Marcus Reed pushed the throttles forward. The twin jet engines roared to life, sending waves of hot air rippling across the mist-covered runway. The fuselage trembled, then surged ahead, fast and sure, like a steel arrow reclaiming its dignity. In the cabin, tension hung tight as wire. Olivia Park walked down the aisle, her eyes stealing glances at the closed cockpit door. She had never witnessed a reversal of fate so absolute. The man who had been humiliated was now in command of everyone's lives. When the nose lifted off the ground, the passengers collectively held their breath, a heartbeat of silence. Then the sudden lightness of ascent, followed by the rush of applause that filled the air. "Positive climb," Daniel Ortiz announced. "Gear up," Marcus replied. In seat 2A, Victor Langford shut his eyes, gripping the armrest. Every sound, every vibration, cut into him like a blade. The man he had ordered off the plane was now the one keeping him alive at 35,000 feet. The aircraft leveled off, and the familiar ding signaled the seatbelt sign turning off. Olivia took the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached cruising altitude. Estimated flight time is 5 hours and 20 minutes. Please sit back and relax." But no one truly relaxed. Not from fear, but from the collective awareness that they had just witnessed a living lesson in arrogance and grace. In row 15, young journalist Tessa Nguyen was typing furiously on her small laptop. She had already trimmed the footage. Victor shouting, Marcus remaining calm, Olivia stepping in. 1 minute long, sharp and cinematic. The title she typed read, "Businessman yells at black passenger, demands he get off the plane, but the truth stuns the world." She hit post, the video uploaded to Twitter and spread like wildfire. While Meridian 788 glided smoothly above silver clouds, the world below was erupting. Within an hour, the clip hit 500,000 views. Within 2, it passed 1,000,000. Hashtags flooding in. #flying while black, #Meridian 788, #Karma 835,000 feet. News outlets seized on it. Langford Capital CEO humiliates passenger, not knowing he was the captain of the flight. In seat 2A, Victor felt his phone buzzing non-stop. He looked down. Dozens of notifications, messages from assistants, PR teams, his wife, investors. His name was now the hottest search term in America. The lesson of his life was unfolding live for the world to see. But in the cockpit, Marcus neither knew nor cared. His focus was fixed on the horizon ahead. Outside, the sky was turning red with sunset. Daniel glanced over and smiled. "You're remarkably calm, Captain. Down there, They're probably losing their minds. Marcus replied, his voice soft as wind. Let them. Our job is to bring 180 people home safely. The rest belongs to the world. The words carried quiet weight, a philosophy forged through thousands of flight hours and countless moments of being underestimated, yet choosing composure over confrontation. In the cabin, Olivia poured coffee for an elderly woman whose hands trembled as she whispered, "That captain, he's extraordinary." Olivia smiled, eyes shining. "Yes, ma'am. And the most remarkable thing is, he never had to prove it." Meanwhile, Victor Langford leaned back in his seat, eyes hollow. Every subtle vibration of the aircraft pulsed like a reminder that everything he had once worshipped, power, money, status, was an illusion. Outside, the sky stretched vast and golden. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Reed kept his hands steady on the controls, his eyes reflecting the same golden light. He didn't yet know that far below, his name was sparking a storm, not of scandal, but of faith. 3 hours after leaving New York, the western sky had darkened. The sunset bled into a deep crimson streak, surrendering to a violet blue night that wrapped the cockpit in stillness. On the radar, a massive convective storm cell twisted above the Rockies, a storm being born mid-air, violent and unpredictable, as if mirroring human arrogance itself. Daniel Ortiz stared at the weather screen, his voice tense. "That's a strong pressure core, Captain. This one's huge. Not sure we can get around it." Marcus studied the red and yellow swirls flashing across the radar, his fingers tapping lightly on the yoke. "We'll climb to flight level 370. Southern routes are jammed. If we're lucky, we'll clear the top." He flipped on the intercom, his voice deep and calm, speaking of the storm ahead as though it were nothing more than passing rain. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reed. We're encountering some rough weather ahead. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain seated. We'll be adjusting altitude to ensure your absolute safety. Thank you for your cooperation." Moments later, the storm struck. Lightning ripped through the night sky in blinding flashes. The fuselage shuddered, wind howling through the thin metal shell like the roar of a wild beast. Passengers screamed. A glass shattered. A child cried out. The sound of wind battering the cockpit windows echoed like an orchestra of chaos. Olivia Park moved quickly down the aisle, hands trembling as she steadied herself on seat backs, checking belts row by row. In the flickering light, she caught sight of Victor Langford. His face was pale, drenched in sweat despite the cool air. His knuckles whitened as he clutched the armrest, eyes locked on the ceiling. In his mind, a cruel irony surfaced. "I wanted that man off this plane. Now I'm praying he keeps it in the sky." In the cockpit, Daniel shouted over the roar, "Shears picking up! Right side's unstable!" Marcus tightened his grip on the controls, eyes fixed on the instruments. His voice never wavered. "Hold steady. Reduce cruise speed 0.02 Mach. Cut auto. Throttle. I have control." His hands moved with surgical precision, every adjustment clean and deliberate. The engine's roar softened. The aircraft dropped slightly, then steadied. Outside, the storm still raged. But inside, Marcus's calm spread like an invisible counterforce. Daniel glanced over, wide-eyed. We could have lost a wing, Captain, if you hadn't slowed in time, Marcus replied softly. Flying through storms is a lot like living, Daniel. You can't always avoid them, but you can learn not to let them consume you. In the cabin, Olivia finally made it back to her seat, fastening her belt. The turbulence eased. The crying stopped. The wind still howled beyond the windows, but now it sounded different, not like chaos, but like the natural heartbeat of the sky. Victor still sat bowed forward, breathing hard. In the flickering light, he saw his reflection in the window. Pale, fragile, stripped of the man who once commanded the world. He whispered to himself, almost confessing, "He saved me." Just then, Marcus's voice filled the cabin again, calm, grounded, unwavering, as if no storm had ever existed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've passed through the weather system. Everything is under control. Thank you for your trust." The cabin exhaled in relief. A few passengers began to clap. In the cockpit, Daniel chuckled softly, the tension melting from his face. "That was the biggest storm of the night, Captain." Marcus looked out the window where a silver edge of moonlight began to appear on the horizon. "No, Daniel," he said quietly. "The real storm is waiting for us on the ground." Behind them, in the business cabin, Victor Langford buried his head in his hands. He didn't know that at that very moment, Tessin Nguyen's phone pinged with a notification. Her video had just passed 8 million views, and below them, as Meridian 788 sliced through the clouds, all of America was raging against his name. The storm faded. Outside the windows, the sky opened wide, calm and crystal clear, as if chaos had never existed. At 37,000 feet, Meridian 788 glided through moonlight, its metallic body shimmering silver like a silent arrow piercing the night. But inside, the aftershocks lingered. Passengers whispered, replaying what had just happened. Some spoke of the captain's composure. Others said they had never felt so safe. Only Victor Langford sat frozen, staring blankly into the dark beyond the glass. The storm still raged, not outside but within him. Then a voice from the cockpit filled the cabin, steady, deep, like fate itself speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reed. We are beginning our descent into Los Angeles. Ground weather is clear, 22 degrees, excellent visibility. Thank you for your patience and for flying with us." Olivia Park smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed all day. She looked down the aisle, faces once tense now softened, eyes glimmering with relief. An elderly woman whispered to her, "That captain, he's a gift from God." Olivia nodded gently. "And sometimes," she said softly, "God likes to disguise himself as someone we least expect." In the cockpit, Daniel Ortiz scanned the approach chart and grinned. "You're going for a greaser, aren't you, Captain?" Marcus smiled. "I don't fly for smooth landings. I fly for correct ones." His hands moved lightly on the controls, subtle and precise. The Airbus A321 began its descent in a perfect arc. Below, the lights of Los Angeles bloomed like a glowing sea, welcoming them home. The landing gear touched down so softly, it was almost silent. No bump, no bounce, just perfection. What pilots called a greaser. And in that moment, the cabin erupted. Applause thundered. Cheers echoed. Someone shouted, "Captain Reed! Captain Reed!" Olivia looked around, eyes glistening with tears. She knew she was witnessing history, not just for aviation, but for humanity. Victor Langford remained motionless. The applause didn't soothe him. It struck like hammers against his pride. He realized the celebration wasn't for a safe landing. It was for the collapse of his arrogance. As the plane taxied to the gate, the passengers' phones began to buzz. Wi-Fi had returned, and the world came rushing in. Dozens of alerts, headlines, and messages filled every screen. A passenger gasped, "Oh my God, that video! It's viral!" In seat 2A, Victor unlocked his phone. The glow of the screen felt like judgment. On Twitter, Langford Capital CEO yells at black passenger who turns out to be the captain. Over 6 million views, thousands of furious comments. A red banner scrolled across a news feed. Langford Capital drops 12% following racial incident on Meridian 788. His throat tightened. His hands trembled as he opened his email. Urgent messages flooded in, from PR, from the board, from Tanaka in Tokyo. And one short message from his sister, Elise Langford. "You've destroyed us, Victor." The screen blurred as his vision dimmed. The cabin seemed to shrink around him, the air thinning, every round of applause slicing deeper into his pride. The cockpit door opened. Marcus Reed stepped out, uniform crisp, expression calm. He shook hands with passengers, nodded politely. Voices overlapped, thank yous, praise, awe. An elderly woman clasped his hand, trembling. "Son, you saved more than a flight today." Marcus smiled faintly. "Just doing my job, ma'am." When Victor rose, he tried to avoid Marcus's eyes, but fate forced him to cross paths with the man he had once tried to throw off this plane. They stopped, face to face, separated by a single step. Victor's lips parted. "Aye, about earlier." Marcus cut him off, his tone neither cold nor warm. "It's all right, sir. We all forget our true place sometimes." A pause. "Now have a safe trip, on the ground." Marcus turned away, continuing to greet the passengers. Victor stood frozen, hollow, eyed. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be forgiven, but not worthy of it. As he stepped off the jet bridge, camera flashes exploded. A sea of reporters awaited. "Mr. Langford, did you really discriminate against the black captain? Do you have an apology? How does it feel knowing the man you insulted just saved your life?" Victor lifted his briefcase to shield his face, head lowered, walking through the storm of lights and questions, as the empire he built crumbled around him. Behind the glass, Marcus Reed remained at the cabin door, standing tall, composed. And at that moment, not in the sky, but within the hearts of everyone watching, he had just completed the most flawless landing of his life. 3 days after the incident, America was still ablaze. The story of Flight Meridian 788 dominated every morning broadcast, from major newspapers to millions of reaction videos online. But amid the storm of outrage and blame, only one person remained silent: Captain Marcus Reed. He gave no statements, no interviews, no carefully written posts. While Victor Langford stumbled through a clumsy, lawyer-scripted public apology, Marcus quietly returned to the skies. For him, Proving himself was never about words. It was about action. Meridian Airways soon realized the impact of what had happened. They arranged one exclusive interview, broadcast during national prime time. The studio lights glowed. On camera, Marcus sat upright, dressed not in his pilot's uniform, but a simple grey shirt. The host began. "Captain Reed, the whole world knows your name now. Do you feel any satisfaction seeing the man who insulted you lose everything?" Marcus looked up. The studio lights reflected in his eyes, calm, steady, profound. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I take no joy in someone's downfall. I only want people to remember the person you look down on today might be the one holding your life tomorrow." The room fell silent. He continued, his voice smooth and balanced, like the wind above the clouds. "We live in an age where everyone wants to speak, but few are willing to listen. I don't hate Mr. Langford. I only hope that because of this, there will be one less person who judges, and one more person who shows respect." The host nodded, eyes glistening. The interview lasted barely 10 minutes, but its echo lingered for weeks. Thousands of pilots, flight attendants, and passengers sent letters of gratitude. One message read, "You made me believe that composure can be stronger than power." Meanwhile, Victor Langford, forced to resign, vanished from the public eye. His mansion was surrounded by reporters. In a rare encounter on the street, he said only one sentence before the cameras. "I learned that sometimes the one who saves you is the same person you once looked down on." Months later, Marcus Reed was named Captain of the Year, not just for his skill, but for his professionalism and humanity under pressure. At the ceremony, he spoke briefly. "Flying isn't about conquering the sky. It's about learning humility before it. Because the moment you think you're greater than the wind will teach you a lesson." After the ceremony, Marcus returned to the cockpit. Another flight, another journey. As he closed the door, Daniel Ortiz pointed to a new brass plaque mounted beside it. The engraving gleamed under the cabin light. "Character is what we do when no one is watching. Professionalism is what we do when everyone is." Marcus ran his hand over the words, smiling faintly. He thought about that flight, the mocking laughter, the restrained anger, the eyes that misjudged him. Then he remembered the landing, soft as breath. No revenge, no retaliation. Just one timeless truth. Dignity doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to be upheld, even when the world is silent. Marcus took his seat, slipped on his headset, and his voice came over the intercom, calm as if chaos had never existed. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Reed. The weather is perfect tonight. We'll be taking off shortly. Thank you for flying with Meridian Airways." Outside the window, the sky stretched open, vast, blue, and fair. A place where color and title mean nothing. Only those who can keep their hands steady and their hearts steadfast truly belong. Not everyone is given the chance to confront the ugliest side of human nature, and even fewer are able to turn that moment into proof of dignity. Marcus Reed did exactly that, not through justification, but through action. He didn't need to retaliate. He simply flew. He didn't need to prove anything. He just did what was right. And in the silence of the cockpit, He let the world understand that the greatest power does not lie in commanding others, but in staying calm when disrespected. The story of Meridian 788 wasn't just a dramatic case of karma. It was a mirror held up to modern society, where prejudice can still hide behind a tailored suit, and where self-respect can still shine through a quiet, composed smile. When the landing gear touched down, that lesson landed too, in the hearts of millions. Respect is not a privilege, it's a standard. If you believe the world needs more people like Marcus Reed, those who choose dignity over anger, action over words, then hit like and share to spread this story. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more journeys where justice and humanity take flight in everyday life. Because sometimes it's inside the narrowest cabins of our lives that we realize just how vast the sky truly is.